Hi, everyone. We're just letting everyone get in from the waiting room, so we'll give everyone just one moment before we dive in. Right. It looks like we've got most people. So we will go ahead and get started. My name is Catherine Warren. I'm the executive director here at NPKUA, and we are so appreciative for all of you joining us tonight. And we're also very appreciative to BioMarin for partnering with us to host this webinar. My contact decided to pop out. Sorry. To host this webinar specifically for teens and their caregivers. I'm personally super excited about it as I have a 13-year-old nephew who's living with PKU. So it feels very a good learning opportunity for me as well. Um, a couple housekeeping items as we get started. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to put in questions through the presentation. We do have a lot we're trying to cover, so we don't know how much time we'll have for questions, but if we don't get to it, we will follow up with you directly or follow up with you after the webinar in the next few days. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the focus tonight is on transition of care and not necessarily on treatments. So we won't be able to touch on any treatment questions. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers. And we've got a great group with us here. I will start with the Mullen family. We have Braden Mullen, who is 18 and goes to Monmouth University, where he is majoring in business, and he lives in Point Pleasant, New Jersey by the shore. He likes to surf and loves living by the beach. I'm a little jealous of that, Braden. He has two summer jobs, one working as beach staff at a private beach club and one working at Pizza Plus on the Point Pleasant Boardwalk. And his mom, Allison, is an associate VP of quality and an RN. Our other family, we've got the Cottermans. Kai is a high school senior who lives in San Francisco. Kai works with his school's admission team to interview prospective students, and he will attend college in the fall, but he still has decisions coming in. So we'll be excited to hear where you're going, Kai. And then his mom, Karen, works at a local university where she directs a Center for Public Service. Thank you all for taking time to join us tonight. We also have a face that's probably familiar to a lot of you, Brittany Murray. Brittany is a nurse practitioner in the metabolism program at Boston Children's Hospital and has 11 years of experience working specifically with PKU. She completed her doctoral degree in nursing, in which her project focused on improving the transition to adulthood for those with PKU. So earlier I said she has 11 years of experience working specifically with PKU. I kind of take issue with that. Brittany is also an adult living with PKU, so she brings both perspectives to this topic. So with that, Brittany, I will hand it over to you, and we're excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And thank you to NPKUA for putting this on and BioMarin for sponsoring. This is a topic that has been a big passion of mine for a while now, as Catherine said, since it was a big focus for me for my doctoral program. So I think this is a really important topic and one that I'm excited to talk about today. So this topic, this presentation is called Adolescence and PKU, Building a Path to Independence. And before we dive in, we just have a brief disclosure that since this is sponsored by BioMarin, I do get compensated to do this. However, as Catherine said, not only have I been working in PKU for a a while, about 11 years, but also as someone who has PKU myself, this is something I really enjoy doing. I like being able to, give a little bit of both perspectives, but I really enjoy the education piece. So thank you again to MPKU and BioMarin. So today, or tonight, I should say, for people on East Coast, what we'll be going over is just briefly going over why keeping Phe levels within range during adolescence and in general matters and how this can impact life. And then just recognizing how changes through school and throughout the years can really influence PKU management. And then talking also about shared decision making and how to be successful in the transition to independence. So first, just with a very brief overview of understanding PKU, because I'm sure everybody is very familiar here. So we know that PKU is a rare genetic condition. Every year in the US, there's about 240 to 315 babies that are diagnosed with PKU, and that's just per year. So since about 1965 to 2025, there's been 19,700 people diagnosed with PKU in the US. So this, is considered a rare condition. But for us, we really have a great community, including educational events like this can really help it feel less rare sometimes. So PKU is caused by a deficiency in this PAH enzyme, or it's called the phenylalanine hydroxylase enzyme. And that enzyme is responsible for breaking down Phe and converting it to tyrosine in the body. And Phe is one of the amino acids in protein. So amino acids are building blocks of protein, and that is found in most protein containing foods. So now you can see on the left, someone who doesn't have PKU and has plenty of working PAH enzyme. No matter, how much protein, if they're consuming high protein, they have all this enzyme to be able to break down that Phe and keep the Phe levels within range. Now, someone with PKU, you can see on the right here that the PAH enzyme, you can see that bar is not full. So it's, and that level varies depending on each person. Some people might have no enzyme function. Some people might have a little more, like you see in this picture. Some people might even have more than that. So your tolerance to protein, your severity, so to speak, of PKU depends really on the level of functioning enzyme, and that can significantly vary. So you can see here this in this picture that there's not a full bar, so to speak, of enzyme function. So when you're consuming protein, if there's not enough enzyme to keep up with it, that's how the Phe levels start building up. And so when the Phe levels build up, we know that too much Phe in the blood can then also travel to the brain and can affect how the brain works. And so untreated PKU, which is something that we, in the US thankfully, do not have to worry about as much anymore because we have newborn screening. So, before that, there were issues such as intellectual disability and seizures and more severe issues from untreated PKU. Now, even with treated PKU, newborn screening, and starting treatment at birth, we can still see some effects late, at any point in the lifespan if the Phe levels are elevated above the treatment goal. And those things can be things such as issues with mood, focus. They can be things like psychiatric things, so anxiety, depression, things like learning and memory, and then processing information. So also like your thinking speed. So those things can all be affected when the Phe levels are higher. So when we're looking at just going throughout life and all the changes that happen, there's a lot that happens. So in the first 11 years, birth to 11 years, there's a lot of rapid growth going on. There's brain growth, and that leads to things like improving memory and starting to problem solve. But, it's really at very early stages. So in terms of care, not only PKU care, but just daily care, that age is very reliant on parents or caregivers. Then once we start to get to this adolescence age, about 12 to 17, this is where we start seeing more major brain changes. And this can, start developing some decision making and then impulse control. But our emotions tend to mature faster than our ability to reason, and therefore sometimes we see some increased risk taking in this age. And so for PKU, sometimes that can look like risk taking with food, which, as we know, obviously, either following whatever treatment plan you're on or a low protein diet is really important to keep Phe levels in range. So risk taking in an adolescent with PKU might look like, experimenting with food or things like that. And then, of course, if that happens, that can lead to more challenges, since in this age, then we can have the issues associated with high Phe levels that we talked about, like focus and mood and memory. Once we get to adulthood, so 18 to 25 years, the brain is still continuing to mature, but this is where really when we're starting to grow independence. So for Phe control, the expert recommendations for a while have had this upper number. So it says 6 milligrams per deciliter here, but if you're more familiar with the other numbers, 360 micromoles per liter is the other one. So for a while, you may have heard the number 120 to 360 or 2 to 6 in the past. The most recent guidelines are very similar, but now they just say under 360 or under 6 if you go by the other numbers. And that's just because they removed that lower number because, so for someone without PKU, normal Phe level is between like 0.5 to 1.5, 2-ish when we're talking about milligrams per deciliter. So that's why taking that bottom number of 2, so when it was 2 to 6 before, taking that away, because being under 2 is safe. It's not harmful. We don't want to be at 0, like under 0.5, but being under 2 is not harmful. It's just, depending on the treatment, that could be really difficult to get there with diet alone. But since, we've had new options, they did want to expand the guidelines a little bit just to allow for a little bit more flexibility and individualized care. So now the guidelines just say keeping Phe levels under 6 or under 360 is what's recommended. There have been some studies that showed that there could be some benefit in keeping Phe levels under 4, or 240 is the other number for that. But, we're still really early in this conversation. But the, current guidelines are to keep those Phe levels under 6 or under 360 for life. So now we're just going to go a little bit more into navigating life in general as an adolescent with PKU. So we talk a lot about diet, but there are many factors that impact the daily life of an adolescent. Diet is one that we talk a lot about and that we have a lot of focus on because it is a big impact, but it's really just kind of the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. There's many other things that can impact adolescents with PKU. The social piece is sometimes a big one, especially in that age, when you're at the age of really trying to fit in, or, trying to make more friends, and that social settings and trying not to feel different or things like that can be a little difficult. And then there's an emotional impact, especially if Phe levels are not well controlled under those guidelines. We can have issues with anxiety and depression, for example. And in addition to that, the academic performance in school can become more challenging. So being harder to focus or, remember things, or even just follow through on things. So sometimes, really just kind of completing a task, really following through with those things can become harder. And then there's the family impact too, what the diet or treatment really has an impact sometimes on the family in terms of like, family meals or eating out or things like that. So I think this quote here, so it says, when you're at a birthday party at McDonald's and everyone is eating cheeseburgers, I would take the meat out of the bun and stuff it with French fries. Kids would say, what's that? For anyone that has ever taken the meat out of a burger or hot dog, or taken cheese off a pizza, or even brought their own food to a party or event, probably understand this quote. So much of what we do tends to revolve around food sometimes. things like birthdays, holidays, celebrations. And then when we get older, dating, you often go out to dinner or go out to meals. So it becomes important to be able to become comfortable with the diet looking a little different with PKU. I think it's important to note that those with PKU can still participate in all of those things, can still participate in all those events. Your food or, some things might just look a little different. But as you can see, here from this quote, and for anyone that's kind of experienced something similar before, you can still participate in those things, but, start to slowly get comfortable with maybe the what you're eating looking a little different from everyone else. And so the other thing that's important to point out is with adolescents, as you're gaining independence, sometimes keeping those feed levels in that goal range can be a little bit more challenging. So you can see here that, in the really young stages, 0 to 4 years old, 84% have feed levels in that goal range. This is older information, so that's why you also see the below target fee range. And this is also, as you can see, from 2017. So also before we had some other treatment options available. But it still just shows that, once you become an adolescent and you have more independence, it can become more challenging because there are all those other factors that we talked about. When you're a baby, there's not as many other factors. Your whatever you're eating really just depends solely on what your caregiver or parent is giving you, and there's not things like social pressure and all those things. So it's much different in that age than when you get older. And you can see over 30 years, the percent of those within the target range goes to 31%. So definitely a significant difference than the earlier age. And there could be many reasons for this, but this is one of the reasons why it's so important to be able to prepare adolescents so that they can be successful with independent management as they get older and become more independent. So there can be many reasons why staying under control becomes more difficult, which we kind of touched on a little bit, but just to go into it a little bit more, that growing independence is a big one and just really kind of wanting more autonomy, but starting to have, some emotional pushback, whether it is, out loud or just internally of questioning, like, why do I really need to do this? Like, this is a lot, or just what we call treatment fatigue, being at the point where you're like, I am, kind of getting sick of doing this because it can be something that obviously is a lot to do every day sometimes. And then we've talked briefly about the social pressures before, just, wanting to fit in. And, I think the other piece that can come into play is, we talked earlier about risk taking in that age starting. And so when that happens and the feed levels are higher, sometimes you can experience some brain fog. So it also can be difficult to fully recognize the consequences that are happening in that moment. Busy schedules are also a big one. When you're getting older, not only are you becoming more independent, but you are maybe participating in more things outside of just, home and school. So maybe you're doing after school activities or going out with friends. And that can, make schedules very different and challenging sometimes. And then sometimes just access. So unfortunately, we still do struggle sometimes with access to low protein foods and formula. So that sometimes can be something that comes into play. So we talk a lot about feed levels, but it's also important to note that nutrition and overall health are things that are also really important. And one of those things is getting enough protein. So I know we talk a lot about not having too much protein, but getting enough protein is also really important, and especially during this time because there's a lot of growth happening. And so what I mean by getting enough protein is everyone has, whether you have PKU or not, everyone has an overall protein goal or your body's overall protein needs of what you need for the day in order for your body to, function and do all the things that protein is needed. And that can depend on many different things like age, weight, activity level, many different things. So the protein goal then from food depends on what you can tolerate in terms of, how much you can tolerate before feed levels go up. And so from that point, so let's say, you can tolerate, you can tolerate 10 grams of protein from food, but your body needs 60 grams to do all these functions and to stay active, then that means that there's going to need to be 50 grams that are made up from formula. So that's where the formula comes in. So that's the, I sometimes call it the safe protein. I used to actually call it my protein shake because that's basically what it is. It's just low and fee or fee-free version of protein. So that's what we mean by getting overall protein. That might look very different depending on, the individual tolerance or treatment. Either you have that protein goal and you might be getting more or less of it from food or formula, just depending on where you're at. But making sure that you're either hitting all your, or both hitting all your protein needs from food and hitting all your goals of your formula amounts is really important to make sure that you're getting enough overall protein. So another thing that can be challenging is that when Phe levels begin to increase, we talked about some of the consequences. And so when you have some of those things, that can then make managing PKU even more difficult. So for example, we talked about how memory can be affected, for one. And another thing that we didn't talk too much about, but that impulse control can be even more difficult when your Phe levels are high. So if you are having a hard time, let's say managing a PKU diet, and then your Phe levels go up, and then your memory is not as sharp, so you have more trouble remembering to take your formula when you need to, for example, or you have more trouble avoiding those high protein foods that you should avoid, because it's just more difficult to do that when your Phe levels are higher. And then of course that leads to more problems with the Phe levels, and it kind of gets stuck in this cycle. So that's why, having the support of things like your clinic team and your parents and caregivers can be helpful to help break out of that, these cycles. But if that is something that has happened, if you've gotten into one of those cycles, lowering your feedback into the recommended range can help improve the brain function and those consequences that we talked about. So it can help, improve the thinking and memory, just better brain activity. We talked about how it can affect mood, so it can help with your emotional well-being, brain chemistry, mental health, and then just cognitive performance. And then that you might see that in things like school performance, athletic performance, even like socially, how you do in social situations, things like that. So all those things can improve when we see improvement in Phe levels. So now to go more into this transitioning to independence stage. So we can refer back to this timeline when we're talking about transition to independence, just to help kind of show all these different things that are going on. So in this early stage, those earlier years we talked about before, like 0 to 11, this is a time where the person with PKU is really mostly reliant on, their parents or caregivers to help with PKU management. It's definitely a time where, you can start taking on, some small things, or just, helping to build confidence and learn more about PKU, but it's, still very heavily reliant on parents or caregivers for care. And then when you start getting to that adolescent age, like 12-ish is where it can be a good time to start really encouraging those with PKU to take over more responsibility or more control of their care. And then, of course, once you get to adulthood, it says adult focus clinics here, but there are unfortunately not a lot of those. So anyone here, if they've had that conversation with their clinic, you may be staying at your same pediatric clinic, or you might be one of the few lucky ones that have the opportunity to have an adult focus clinic. But for those that don't, this is obviously, once you get into adulthood, a time where you're pretty independent with your management, but can really still go to your clinic team for support. So finding this right balance of guidance from parents or caregivers and, freedom or independence for the teen or the person with PKU can be a difficult balance. It's important, though, to try to let the teen or person with PKU do as much as they can independently, while still being available for support as needed. And it's hard to, it's not something that we can give an exact age on, because this might differ. It might differ on everyone's just readiness ability and many different factors. But I will say that it's often likely earlier than you may think. And so I can give an example just from my, perspective. So what I mean by that is, there was definitely a time that I absolutely could make my formula by myself. However, I was kind of in that gray zone of transitioning to taking on my management on my own, and my parents still doing some of it for me. So even though I could do it on my own, I knew that if I didn't, my mom would do it for me. And, as a teenager or younger, adolescent, obviously taking the easier way out sometimes is what you think can be helpful in the moment. But obviously, there was a point that I knew how to do it myself. And so to be able to, really take over when I could do that, would be something, that would be helpful to do. And that would be, important. And I think, like I said, I think it can sometimes be earlier than we realize. But of course, when the parents are still there to help support, if, they can't fully take it on, is really helpful. So shared decision making is another important part of this transition to independence. So when we're having this shift in care, when we talk about the transition to like adulthood or more independence, in healthcare, sometimes we use the word healthcare transition. And what that means is we're basically shifting from, the model of care that is very child/family focused to a model of care that is very adult or patient focused. So instead of, it being more the family managing, when you shift to an independent adult, it becomes, the patient. So it's a different shift. And in the process of doing that, there's obviously an in between where you're making these decisions together. I mean, obviously you can always still talk to people when you're independent as well. But, as a parent or caregiver who's, still has a child under 18, you're still making decisions, but can come to a point where there's some shared decision making. And what that can look like is really just, talking with the clinic team too, considering care options, weighing the risks and benefits for, you, your family, your child specifically, and then just talking to each other about preferences. And sometimes those preferences align. Maybe the child or person with PKU and the parents are on the same page, or maybe they have some differing thoughts or opinions. But then trying to come together to make a decision of what works best for, your family, for all of you, is what shared decision making looks like, is really just trying to go through that process more together instead of, it all being the parent, being on the parent, because that is obviously what it is for those, first many years that we talked about, until you get to that point where the child can start participating more in these conversations. So, how can this be built? So one thing that can be really important, is encouraging open communication. But also I would say, to parents is, also allowing children, teens, to be their own advocate when possible, but, have this conversation with them to see what they prefer and what they're comfortable with, and encourage them to speak up for themselves when they can. And so the example for this that comes to mind, is, there was definitely a time where, for example, we'd go out to a restaurant, with my family, and, I think my mom was so used to doing all the talking for me, she would be the one to speak up, that would say, oh, she can't, she can't have this and this. And I wanted to be like, I want to say it, like, I can do it. You don't need to do it. So that shift can sometimes be, again, something that we talk about together, about when the child is ready to do that on their own, but encouraging them to be their own advocate. And it doesn't have to be just restaurants, it can be even like school. There was a time where, that conversation with school about PKU, and making sure that there were, that I could, eat and things I needed in the cafeteria or things like that. Like me taking on those conversations was a helpful process to start doing more. Um, and then discussing things like feelings and friendships, but also, I think it's important to also discuss, are they open with friends about PKU? I think it's really important to start having a support system, not just at home. Obviously, at home, your parents, caregivers, siblings, those are going to be a big support system. But as the child, as you start becoming more independent and eventually are going to be spending time outside the house as well, whether it's, school, events, sports, things like that, it's important to also have a support system outside the home. So being able to find friends that you feel comfortable with, telling about PKU and, feeling confident enough in explaining that can really make a big difference and really, having that good support system can be really important. Um, and then, we talked about the shared decision making of just reviewing things like diet and treatment decisions together, and discussing the importance of, really um, sticking to like treatment and checkups, like making sure that you're still following up with clinic and talking about the importance of that and why that's important. And also just celebrating wins together. I think this whole transition period is really kind of like it's a big process. It's stepwise. So you don't have to go from, 0 to 100 overnight or, all of a sudden be perfect. It's about, kind of making these stepwise, slow, making progress and then celebrating those wins. I think another thing that I would also say is, at least for me, I think a mindset that really helped was just having the mindset of, my parents from when I was young always made it clear that while managing PKU is very important and I have to make sure that I do manage it. But otherwise PKU does not have to hold me back. And that was really important because that really just allowed me to, have whatever goals I wanted to and not worry about, PKU being in the way of those goals, but still knowing that, I have to manage PKU. And of course, knowing that managing PKU is important for me to be able to reach all those goals. But just having that mindset that, PKU is not something that's holding me back. It's something that, I have to do things a little differently than some other people. But other than that, it's still something that I can accomplish whatever I want to accomplish. So I think that mindset was also really helpful for sticking to management and just, kind of accomplishing whatever I wanted to accomplish. And so some other ways to just kind of support this time when you're kind of transitioning from this, less independence to more independence, is things like encouraging problem solving skills are really important because, when we talk, how we talked earlier about how when kids reach that point of starting to have more time outside the home and on their own, like at school, but also, going out with friends and things like that, they're going to have to be able to work through some of these problems themselves, when, if they went out to a restaurant that they thought they could have something on the menu and found out, when they got there that they were, they were out of that for the night. So then what, how do you work through that? So just making sure that they can have those problem solving skills for when they're on their own. And teaching some PKU friendly meal preparation. So, I always found that I seemed to just do better when I was able to prepare ahead of time. If I was able to prepare meals, that was much easier to stay under good control than if, you have a busy schedule and you're just trying to grab something quick that might not always be the best thing. So being able to prepare ahead of time. And then for the week, I'm not worried about preparing things that I can have. That can be really helpful, but also just knowing how to prepare PKU friendly things is just a really helpful skill to have. And that can start young, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And then just, parent acting as what we call guiding mind. So again, just, allowing the child or person with PKU to take on more independence, but still be available for support and be there to, give guidance and advice. And sometimes reminders are really helpful. I would often set reminders on my phone. There's apps now that sometimes can be helpful. So those things can be another helpful way for adolescents to, start managing on their own. So, to have just some suggestions of this process, this is just a timeline of what this process of transitioning to independence or to adulthood might look like. But, obviously, like we said earlier, this really may vary. Not everyone's going to be doing these things at the same age. It really just depends on, your individual child or you as the person with PKU, your individual readiness and many different factors. But this this whole process can really start early, which I think is an important thing to note. So we talk about the adolescence to adulthood period a lot, but being able to be successful in independent management can start at a really early age. And so what we mean by that is even as toddlers, they can start having, some decisions and things like, I've seen parents that will have like a basket of low protein snacks, or they'll, present some snack options, here's some snack options. Which ones do you want? Or, for dinner, you can have this vegetable or this vegetable. Which one do you want? So just starting to give them some options that are obviously, safe for them, that are PKU friendly, but just having them be able to have those options can really be helpful from an early age. And then just starting to build some independence as they get a little older. Children can kind of help things, obviously they might not be able to fully cook on their own yet, but can just start helping with little things in the kitchen, like measuring out portions or, doing like child safe things that are still involving them in cooking things. And then, addressing not only feelings of being different when young, but also, when young, addressing like how to describe PKU, making sure that the child knows knows how to describe PKU, especially if they are asked, at school, because that's something that sometimes comes up a lot is, someone asked why I'm not eating this or why I'm not eating that or why I'm drinking this formula. And so just being prepared and them, getting more comfortable with knowing how to answer those questions can be really helpful. And then even as a younger child, even if they can't be at the point where they can completely track things like diet on their own yet, they can still start helping with little things. So for example, like when I was young, I wasn't quite at the point where I could just like track completely on my own. I didn't fully understand like the numbers of, my goal is this and what that really meant. So my parents had this wheel that was on the fridge. And so the wheel would go to, from 0 to my goal, which let's just say 10 for now. And so when I would eat something, my parents would say, "Oh, you just ate 2 grams, so spin the wheel to 2." And then it was a really great visual for me of seeing, oh, okay, so this is how much I just had, and this is how much I have left. And that was just a way that I could participate in tracking from an early age with the help of parents. So that's what we mean by, starting to be involved in things, but also, still having a lot of parent support when needed. And then, as the children get older, just really understanding the diet more will be important. And just obviously, I think an important thing to note is if these things, if you're at the point where you're 12 or over and those things that I just talked about in the younger stages were not done yet, that does not mean it's too late. These are absolutely still things that can be done, that can start being worked on at any age if those are still things that need to be worked on. But then when you get to adolescence is when you can start taking on even more things. So like taking control of their blood spots. However, even that process can start in small steps at an earlier age. So for example, with blood spots, it took me until I was older to be able to do them completely on my own. But what my parents would do was say, okay, well, why don't you go get your blood spot supplies? And the blood spot supplies would be, in a place where I knew. So I would, gather the Lancet, the alcohol swab, my blood spot card, and set it all up. And I would even alcohol my finger. And there became a point where, I was old enough, I could even take off the cap from the lancet and put it up to my finger, but I was still too scared to actually push it myself. So for a while, I would just still need my parents to help with that. So that's kind of like examples of stepwise processes that you can do that, they can start being involved, maybe can't do it fully on their own yet, but at least can start learning the steps. And then when they're ready to take it on themselves, they'll already, know how to do it and have been involved for a while. And so that's another time where, in addition to blood spots, can really start, planning meals, helping with managing stress, like related to the management and things like that. And then also start connecting with, if it hasn't been done already, I mean, this is really something that can start at any age, but either the adolescents or the parents connecting with, not just PKU clinics, but also just PKU support groups. But this is also an area when the adolescent or the person with PKU can start doing some of the talking, like at clinic visits or, talking through the portal when they have questions or things like that. And then, of course, once you get into adulthood is when those with PKU are hopefully going to start being more independent, but this still can take time. So especially, you'll hear from some teens in a bit about how this process was for them. But then there are things that you have to keep in mind, like how to refill, your own medications or formula and making sure that you can do that on your own. So again, those are other things that you can start, being involved with earlier so that you know how to do them when you're on your own. So all these things can be stepwise processes. They don't have to go from, not being able to do it to doing it fully on your own. And so another thing that can be really helpful is just talking to your clinic about ways that they can help make the transition to independence successful, and if they have any tips. One of the ways to do that is to have ways to assess readiness. So this little picture here is just from my project, which was putting together a toolkit. And in that toolkit was things like readiness assessments. And it's helpful to, sometimes as an adolescent, you'll be like, well, I'm pretty good at managing my own care. But when you go through all the questions and things in a readiness assessment, like, okay, I'm great at managing my own care. But when I go through, I realized, okay, I can't really talk to my insurance on my own yet, or can't, refill my medications on my own yet, or, whatever it may be, you may find that, oh, that is something that I do need to work on. So really kind of going through that assessment to see if you are ready for, that transition to adulthood, or if there's still things that you might need more support on, and how to work on that can be really helpful. And your clinic can, help with a lot of these recommendations as well. And then another important thing is, oh, it skipped a slide. Okay, well then I'll just talk about it here real quick. So another really helpful thing is remembering that we have a community here, and you're not alone. So there's many different resources, of course, the MPKUA, and looking at resources on the website in terms of events, conferences. I will definitely make a big plug for that, because I feel like that made a huge difference for me, just being involved in the community at such an early age, because you were able to talk to other people with PKU that really understood. And my parents, really found it helpful too, of being able to talk with other parents. And it can be nice because, as someone with PKU, obviously my family was always very supportive, and they were very involved, and they understood a lot of the day-to-day management, but not to the point of someone that actually, lives with it. And so being able to just talk with others that just really gets it, and you don't have to explain, it's just, it's really helpful. But also the educational piece can be really helpful, because, in clinic visits, you sometimes only get so much time to really learn, or for your clinic team to teach you about PKU. And at conferences or things like that is really where you can learn even more information that you might have not learned just from, the clinic visit. So I really think that attending, events and being involved in the community was something that has been really helpful to also stay under good control. So just to wrap up briefly, this really was just an overview of, obviously we talked very briefly about understanding PKU because I'm sure many are familiar, and then just really more about the challenges during adolescence and growing that independence, including that shared decision making. So that was the overview from the slides and the presentation, but now we're going to go into what will probably be even more interesting part, which is the panel discussion, where you will hear from teens and families that have been through this and can also talk to this. Just making sure they're all on screen here. Okay. So I'm going to start with the first question, and this is also a time where, if there are audience questions, you can put them in the Q&A, and then we can answer them after. But first, so why don't we start? We can start with Braden and Allison. So, how do you make health-related decisions in your family, and have the conversations about healthcare decisions changed as your teen or you, Braden, have gotten older?
Well, I think whenever anything comes up, anything new comes up, if there's a new medication or if there's formula that we have to change, I always talk to them about it to see, is this something you'd be interested in? These are the side effects. This is the benefit. What do you think about it? Before, I would just say, yep, we are starting this. Here we go. We're going to go for it. Right? What would you say?
Yeah, there's definitely been different things where it's like, yeah, I'd be interested in trying that, or no, I don't want to try it. It's not like she just makes the decision for me. I'm included a lot in the process.
Yeah,
Yeah,
started that sort of, maybe early on, pretty early on, just talking about the different modalities and what would benefit him. And then as they got older, there was more of a I have another son. Sometimes I'll say they because I have another son with PKU. So sorry. We sort of made that transition into getting them more involved in the questions and answers about the medications or formulas of treatments.
yeah. Did you ever have a moment where your preferences maybe differed from each other in terms of like treatment options or care decisions? Or were you both pretty much on the same page usually?
We're mostly pretty much on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Kai, how about you? Anything to add?
Yeah, so pretty similar for us. I definitely speak everything over with my mom, but most of the time it's her sending me whatever new treatment has just come out, or me talking to my clinician and going from there. But yeah, as I'm getting older, um it's definitely like I'm definitely hearing more that it's my decision in the end. But we still have a conversation before deciding anything major.
And
Great.
if I could provide an example, I think it was somewhere around middle school one summer, we got a bunch of different types of formula samples and created a chart in the kitchen with criteria that he helped inform, like taste, consistency, how you mix it. And he just tested them and he ranked them all over the course of the summer. He ultimately stayed with what he's been
That's
on
great.
for, but it was sort of an opportunity for him to take ownership of it and think about what that process might be like to build
Yeah.
those skills for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really a way to, like we, talked about earlier, to work through that problem solving. So really, working through how to make those decisions. That's great. If you guys want to keep going on this next question, can you share about a time that you had, and I know you kind of maybe talked about formula a bit, but are there other times you can think of that you had to make an important decision about care? And was that challenging, or what helped?
I mean, the major decisions that come to mind is just as I'm getting older, there are a lot more treatment options that are available to me, and just deciding on if trying those is worth it overall. Um, yeah, and then I guess there's also just the little decisions, like deciding to have a little bit of food from the regular lunch line or a lot of food from the vegetarian side. Yeah.
Great. And how about you, Braden, Allison, anything to add?
Um,
I don't know. I think the major healthcare decisions mostly have been sort of surrounding medication or changing formula. We did do a couple of samples, didn't like any of those. Kept kind of stuck with what the original formula was, right?
yeah,
There are some, like, I don't know if you would consider it a healthcare decision, but there are decisions to be made as far as can they go out of the country for like a long-term vacation, and how does that look, and how do we pack things for that, and what will they eat? I won't be there, so what's going to happen? I think those kind
Yeah.
of, like, for me, that was a major healthcare decision, allowing them to go on their own when they're in high school to on these adventures and make sure that they have the tools they need to really choose wisely. Right.
yeah.
He went
Yeah,
to
no,
Japan, so
that's a
he
good
had to
point.
really figure out what he was going to eat in Japan. So there was a lot of
Oh,
research.
yeah.
What kind of food can he have there? So that was kind of a big decision.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that, is a great example of how, just other things that we're doing, we have to also keep PKU in mind. But obviously you were still able to do that. So that's great. Um, Braden and Alice, Braden and Allison, looking ahead, what do you think will be one of the biggest challenges as you start? I know you've already started doing a lot of managing your own care, but as you continue to kind of take over more, um, is there something that you think will be the hardest?
I think for me personally, staying on track is probably gonna be pretty difficult. I forget a lot of stuff, especially like just in school and everything, and so I think that's definitely gonna be challenging for me. But it's just a skill I'm gonna need in life anyway, just remembering stuff like that. So I'm very willing to start getting better and better at it.
Yeah. Is there something that you've started doing or that you think you might do to help with that? Like, is there something that you've used in terms of like apps or reminders, like anything like that?
Yeah, I've been trying to use like the calendar more on my phone and stuff like that. 'Cause I always had my phone, so
Yeah.
it's always just would be there to remind me and everything.
Mhm.
Great. Yeah. And
Alarm,
Kai, oops, sorry, go ahead.
alarms to remember to take the formula when you go out at night.
Yeah, yep. I know, especially when you're busy. I'm sure sometimes, the day can get away from you. Great. Kai and Karen, anything to add?
Yeah, for me, I feel like I have a really good like rhythm staying at home. So the biggest challenge is definitely going to be college and like having to find out where I'm going to go and pack the right amount of medication and just kind of doing all of that by myself and school in the same day. I'm kind of at a similar place where I like my parents will make my protein equivalent or formula if I don't. So as I'm in school, I kind of rely on that. So I think with a change of location, and all those responsibilities, it's going to be a lot more challenging. But like you were saying, taking the steps, like learning how to order my own medication and stuff now, I think is making me like a lot less anxious.
Yeah, great. So, what what do you hope for when it comes to managing your healthcare in the future to Braden and Kai, or from the parent perspective, what do you hope for when it comes to managing your child's healthcare in the future?
Well, I'm hoping to obviously become a lot more like independent and everything, and just learn to do everything on my own. And I don't know, I think it'll be great to not have to worry about stuff as much. So like it'll be nicer to understand more so what I'm doing and like what I need to be doing and everything, other than besides just like my mom doing everything for me. It'll be a lot more. I'll have a lot more responsibility, which I think will be good.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of am looking forward to, and also a little bit nervous about transferring all of that responsibility of the insurance issues and the ordering of the formula, making sure you have a DME company, getting the medications on time, making them sure they're shipped to wherever you live at that time. Whether you're at college and need them shipped there, or you're going to be home for this month, and making sure to navigate and explain how that all works so that they don't have any of the hiccups.
Yeah.
Um, I don't feel like I like am hoping for much, just really trying to prepare myself in terms of like what was just mentioned, ordering medication. But I do hope for some like physical things like just having ice, having, a refrigerator and like yeah, hopefully a tolerant like roommate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are things, obviously, if you guys haven't already, or just information for the audience, those are definitely things that you can talk to your clinic team about and see, what support your school has, like sometimes requesting a fridge or being able to, make sure you have a dorm that has the space for a fridge, all those things can sometimes be asked. Um, so question for all of you from, both from each perspective. Do you feel like it was challenging to make that shift from the parent managing most of the care to the teen then becoming more independent? And for the parent, what did you find helpful as the parent to kind of, hand over control, so to speak, since I know that can be tough. And then for you guys, the teens, what do you feel like helped you feel confident in taking more control over your care?
I can jump in.
Yeah.
One of the things that has been easy is Kai really trusts and values his clinic. And so even the last visit, he wasn't 18 yet, but I would just let him take the reins. I didn't even go in the room. I was like, do it, practice. This is a time to do that. Because it's critical that he has that relationship in place for the rest of his life. So um that I think was pretty easy and was really valuable. The thing that's been that and I told him I'd mentioned this, that I have to remind myself is to not ask him like all the time, did you take your medicine? So because I mean that wears on the relationship, and I've always said I need to prioritize the relationship, because that's what's really going to get us through this in the long run. um, so there is that part of parenting that's always present for PKU parents who live with people with PKU. It shows up around worries around medication and how that affects levels. And it's just a particular dynamic, I think, in the adolescent phase. So I'm trying to do a better job of letting go of that. And, it's not going to be a disaster if he misses it one night and he has to learn the consequences of that, which he does know. He knows what it is. He makes those decisions himself now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great that you're, able to allow him to learn that and sometimes learn the consequences while you're also still there to be able to, support if it comes to the point where you need to step in.
Yeah, I think the transition, because Braden went to college this year, so the transition of him really taking ownership of his diet himself, counting the protein himself. As little kids, I always took them to the store. Like, we have to read labels. That's what we do. We look at labels and see how, we're trying to get any food we can in the regular store. So you have to know kind of what the protein count is. But, we counted Fee until they were, I don't know, pretty old, I guess 10 or 11, 12, something like that. And then we went to counting protein. So they really learned a lot about that. And that's what he's carrying through now. So he's in the dining hall, he's figuring out by himself what he can eat. I'm not calling him and saying, like, oh yeah, don't forget to get this off the, off the salad bar or whatever. So I think that was important. I also try not to constantly say, did you drink your drink today? And don't forget to take your meds. So I've really tried to stop doing that as well, as they got older. Even through high school, he ran track and cross country. So he had to really make sure that he had the endurance to do so. And if he forgot his formula, he really felt it. So I think that really trying to allow him to make those mistakes and figure it out has helped him to stay a little bit more on track as he went through this transitional period. And we did speak to the dietitian at the school to get
Good.
to see what they could offer him in the dining hall, and they did offer
Yeah.
some
Okay.
options, so that was good.
Great. Yeah, my mom would also like to ask me that question when I was moody, especially. Did you drink your formula because you're being a little moody?
Yeah.
But Braden and Kai, anything else to add from your perspective, at least? Like
Um,
what helped you kind of feel confident in taking over some of that management?
Just yeah, I really agree. Just that you kind of have to learn yourself. Yeah, I mean, as long as things are being done for you, then you might as well not do them. So I think part of independence is just making the mistakes and then hopefully not making them again.
Yeah, I'd also say something similar. Start doing it yourself, and if you make mistakes, it's whatever, and you learn from those mistakes, and you just have to keep doing it yourself, and it's just going to become a process that you don't even realize that you're doing it 'cause it's just in your everyday life now, and it's just as easy as that.
Right. Right, great. Well, this next one will be the last question from my end. So if the audience has any questions, feel free to send them in as well. But thank you everyone for sharing so much and for being so great. So one thing that, I'm definitely interested in knowing from the clinician perspective too is what has your PKU clinic done that has been helpful in providing support through these, transition periods? And what do you think is missing in, the care that we provide as clinicians that could also be helpful for this transition?
For me, the most helpful thing is just being educated about things. Like I was hearing about medications and their upsides and downsides before I was even at the age that I could take those medications. So I think that the clinicians like it's obviously not necessarily a part of their job, but one of like the best things a clinician can do is share like new forms of treatment, especially as like you're going into being 18, because that opens a lot more doors.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's another great kind of plug for when we talked earlier about, making sure that everyone understands the importance of continuing to go to clinic and follow PKU management. That's exactly how you learn about new treatment options is by, continuing to go to clinic. So that's great.
Yeah, I think that also we stay pretty close contact with our clinic. The dietitian is amazing there. She's just responsive and helps us with everything. So when we went through some of the different challenges with and needing more calories because of the activity that he does and did. She really, I mean, was constantly on the phone with us trying to figure out the best way to balance his formula and food intake. So that was like a very close relationship and a very responsive, very on top of everything with us to really know and understand what it was that he needed to make his body function right. And at the optimal level that he needed it to, right? She will even speak to them about their diet by themselves. Like I don't even have to be around. She'll talk to them. So we've had a very close relationship with the clinic, and that has helped us a lot. I think with not only treatment options, but different new formulas come out. She's wanting to send us some samples to see if they like it or not, which they probably normally don't, but they try it. So I think that has been and I think that sets them up for going forward to know that it's so important to keep up with their clinic and make sure that they go to their appointments and that they're kept track of in that way. Right.
And anything else that you feel either was missing or that you wish you had earlier? Or do you feel like you felt well supported?
No, I think, yeah, pretty well supported by the clinic and the dietitian always very responsive, even as far as writing letters to the school to say that my older son needed a dorm room with a kitchen.
Yeah.
They were very on, they're
Yeah.
like, you need that, whatever you need. So I think it's been an amazing experience for us.
Great. Yeah, I think the care and the focus on this transition to adulthood period has definitely come a long way. It's something that we kind of didn't focus as much on in the past because, we just thought this would be a natural transition until we realized it's not that natural. We really need to, work on it and have support and do these steps. So that's great. Anything else that any of you want to add or final thoughts before I hand it back to our NPKUA team?
I've got one idea, and I don't know if I'm stepping out of the line as far as the boundaries of this conversation, but it relates to the work of MPKUA certainly. And just to mention that Kai and the rest of the family have done some advocacy work and met with folks, which I think I took upon and looked at as an opportunity to feel empowered about saying, related to your questions, what do you wish was different? I mean, a lot of that is far beyond our control, but helping Kai and the rest of the family think about what that might look like, and then how could we help work toward that. And NPKUA is one of the organizations that's been a big part of that when we've gone to meet with
Yeah,
representatives, et cetera. So that to me is about hope and looking at the generation that comes after us. So thanks.
absolutely. All right. Well, Catherine, I can hand it back over to you.
Yeah, that was a great segue, Karen. Thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation. We appreciate, Karen, Kai, Allison, Braden, for y'all sharing your lived experience, and Brittany, you as well, and always enjoy learning from you. So we do have just one final slide that we're going to throw up on the screen. It's almost like Karen wanted to set me up for it, but some different ways to get involved, and that, the NPKUA can provide support. We have our mentor program, which in the past year we have expanded to teens 14 plus, with your parental approval, can connect with young adults who are living with PKU. These relationships can be a one-time conversation, or they can be an ongoing, really whatever the person needs. For our parents and our caregivers, we also have monthly community calls. So we do have one for caregivers of teens. You can reach out to our director of community engagement, Sarah Gallagher, who can get you kind of on the recurring appointment for that. And then we also do have some school navigation support. And as Karen mentioned, our advocacy committee, you don't have to be an adult to be participating in that. So that's another great opportunity. And as Brittany said, the conferences, we do have our biennial community conference coming up in July of 2026. And it's just a great way to connect with others who have shared experiences. So with that, again, a thank you to our wonderful partner, BioMarin, and we will say goodnight. So talk to you all soon.
Thank you, everyone.